"Help me. I can't get out." These may have been the final words of 19-year-old Kanika Jenkins, trapped alone in a hotel freezer in the early hours of September 10, 2017. 24 hours earlier, Kanika was dancing at a party, texting her sister, borrowing her mother's car for what should have been just another Saturday night out. She was vibrant, young, looking forward to starting college. By Sunday morning, hotel workers would find her body frozen solid in a walk-in freezer she should never have been able to access. This is the story of how a teenager vanished from a crowded hotel party and ended up dead in a locked basement kitchen that required keycard entry. How someone who called her sister at 1:30 a.m. saying, "I'm fine, just having fun," was discovered lifeless just 11 hours later in a place she had no business being. The Crowne Plaza Hotel's security system captured dozens of cameras worth of footage that night. They recorded Kanika arriving at the party. They showed her stumbling through hallways, bumping into walls, clearly disoriented. The cameras followed her journey through the hotel's corridors, right up until she rounded a corner toward that freezer. But in the most critical moment, when she entered that fatal room, the cameras captured nothing. That blind spot would fuel conspiracy theories, viral social media campaigns, and ultimately a $10 million lawsuit that revealed just how many people failed Kanika Jenkins that night. If this already has you curious, hit like and stay with me, because what really happened Friday, September 8, 2017, Chicago's West Side. Kanika Jenkins was getting ready for her first hotel party. At 19, she was still living at home, still borrowing her mother's car for nights out. Her friends knew her limit. Teresa Martin had always said one drink was too much for her daughter. What none of them knew was that Kanika would encounter a drug that night she had never taken before. Teresa Martin had raised Kanika alone, working multiple jobs to provide for her family. She was the kind of mother who always answered her phone, day or night. After 1:30 a.m. on September 9th, she would never hear her daughter's voice again. The friends who invited Kanika promised they would watch out for her. They were older, more experienced with parties and drinking. But when things went wrong, they would leave the hotel early, taking Kanika's phone with them while claiming they had gone back to get it. Their story about what happened that night would never quite add up. Room 926 at the Crowne Plaza was paid for with a fraudulent credit card that investigators would later trace to a Chicago area gang. Dozens of people would crowd into that room for an illegal party that hotel security had received multiple complaints about. Police would never connect the gang link to Kanika's death, but it would fuel public suspicion for years to come. By 11:30 p.m., Kanika had borrowed her mother's car and was driving toward a fate none of them could foresee. The timeline of Kanika Jenkins' final hours begins at 11:30 p.m. on Friday, September 8th, when she left her family's home on Chicago's West Side. She drove her mother's borrowed car roughly 20 miles northwest to Rosemont, Illinois, where the Crowne Plaza O'Hare Hotel sits just minutes from one of America's busiest airports. At 1:13 a.m. on Saturday morning, security cameras captured Kanika arriving at the hotel. She made her way to the 9th floor, where room 926 was already packed with partygoers. The room had been rented under suspicious circumstances, paid for with a fraudulent credit card that police would later link to gang activity. But Kanika knew nothing about these connections. Within 17 minutes of her arrival, Kanika made what would be her final phone call home. At 1:30 a.m., she spoke briefly with her sister. "I'm fine. Just having fun," she said. Those were the last words her family would ever hear from her. But witnesses at the party were already noticing troubling signs. When Kanika hugged an acquaintance she knew from the neighborhood, he immediately noticed she was swaying back and forth, unable to maintain her balance. Other partygoers watched her attempt to dance, but she would move for only brief moments before appearing sad and sitting down alone. One witness later told investigators that Kanika wasn't acting like her usual self. She seemed disconnected, confused, struggling to focus on conversations around her. Yet when questioned later, her friends insisted she had consumed just 1 cup of alcohol that night. This claim would become a central point of conflict. Teresa Martin knew her daughter's limits better than anyone. Even one drink was too much for Kenneka. The stark contradiction between the friend's insistence that she had barely consumed any alcohol and the multiple witness accounts of severe disorientation raised immediate red flags for the family. What the witnesses were seeing was not the normal effects of a single drink. Kenneka was displaying signs of profound impairment that suggested something else was affecting her system. She was losing coordination, struggling with balance, and showing signs of confusion that went far beyond what a small amount of alcohol should have caused. After 1:30 a.m., the timeline becomes fragmented. Security footage would later show Kenneka moving through the hotel's corridors alone, but the exact sequence of events between her final phone call and her appearance on surveillance cameras remains unclear. What is certain is that somewhere in those missing hours, a night that began with dancing and laughter took a devastating turn that would cost Kenneka Jenkins her life. At 4 a.m., Teresa Martin's phone rang with the call every parent dreads. Kenneka's friends were on the other end, calling from her borrowed car in the hotel parking lot. "We can't find Kenneka," they told her. They had already left the party and were preparing to drive back to Chicago without her. Teresa immediately drove to the Crowne Plaza, arriving around 5:30 a.m. Her first instinct was to demand access to the hotel's security footage, but management refused. Hotel policy required an official missing persons report before they would release any surveillance material. This bureaucratic roadblock would prove to be the first in a series of institutional failures that cost precious time. At 7:14 a.m., a desperate Teresa called the Rosemont Public Safety Department. The dispatcher on duty seemed unconcerned about the missing teenager. "Wait a few more hours," Teresa was told. "People often turn up on their own." This dismissive response would later become a central allegation in the family's wrongful death lawsuit. Hours passed while Kenneka remained missing. It wasn't until 12:46 p.m. on Saturday that her older sister, Leonore Harris, was finally able to file an official missing persons report. Only then, at 1:15 p.m., did police officially notify hotel management that Kenneka Jenkins was missing. Nearly 10 hours had elapsed since her friends first reported her disappearance. As the investigation began, 3 key pieces of evidence emerged, each raising more questions than answers. The first concerned her friends' behavior. They claimed they had left the party to retrieve Kenneka's phone from the hotel room, but this explanation immediately fell apart when investigators discovered they had her phone with them when they called Teresa. This lie about their movements cast doubt on everything else they had said about that night, yet no criminal charges were ever filed against them. The second piece involved the fraudulent credit card used to rent room 926. Police traced the card to a Chicago area gang, suggesting the party had connections to criminal organizations. This discovery fueled public speculation about whether Kenneka had been targeted or harmed intentionally. However, investigators never found any evidence linking the gang connection to her disappearance or death. The third element was the mounting witness testimony about Kenneka's severe disorientation at the party. Multiple people described her as impaired far beyond what a single drink should have caused. This evidence clearly indicated she had consumed something that dramatically affected her cognitive function and motor skills. But what exactly had she ingested? The answer to that question would remain elusive for weeks. Each lead seemed promising initially, but ultimately led nowhere. The friends' lies, the criminal connections, and the unexplained impairment all suggested foul play, yet none provided the smoking gun that investigators needed to build a criminal case. Teresa Martin had raised her daughter alone, working multiple jobs to provide for Kenneka and her siblings. She knew her children's habits, their voices, their patterns. When those friends called at 4 a.m. saying they couldn't find Kenneka, Teresa's maternal instincts immediately told her something was terribly wrong. "I knew something was wrong." Kenneka always answered her phone. Teresa would later tell investigators, her voice heavy with the weight of a mother's intuition. She had never known her daughter to go hours without contact, especially when she was supposed to be having fun at a party. The family refused to wait for bureaucracy to run its course. While hotel management cited policies and police dispatchers suggested patience, Teresa and her family took matters into their own hands. Kenneka's sister Leonore would later describe those desperate early morning hours. "We searched that hotel ourselves while police told us to wait. They walked through corridors, checked stairwells, asked questions of anyone who would listen. Hotel guests watched as a frantic family combed through public areas, calling Kenneka's name, showing her photograph to strangers. The hotel staff offered little assistance during these crucial hours when every minute could have mattered." In Kenneka's bedroom back home, her belongings remained exactly as she had left them. College brochures sat on her desk next to makeup and jewelry. Family photographs covered the walls, showing a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. The contrast between the normalcy of her room and the chaos of her disappearance was stark. But Teresa Martin was not just grieving during those early hours. She was documenting. She kept detailed notes of every conversation with police, every delay by hotel management, every inconsistency in her daughter's friends' stories. She recorded times, names, and responses with the precision of someone who understood that someone would eventually have to answer for what was happening. Teresa sensed that this was not just a case of a teenager staying out too late. The institutional failures were already mounting, and she was building a record that would later prove crucial. Sunday, September 10th, 2017, 12:25 a.m. Nearly 24 hours after Kenneka Jenkins had vanished from room 926, a hotel worker decided to join the search effort. Police had finally begun reviewing surveillance footage, tracking Kenneka's movements through the hotel's corridors, but they still hadn't located her. The worker made his way to the hotel's basement level, checking areas that hadn't been thoroughly searched. He entered an unused kitchen space that had been vacant for months, a remnant from when the hotel had operated a different restaurant configuration. The kitchen was dark, filled with abandoned equipment and storage areas. At the back of the kitchen stood a large walk-in freezer. The worker opened the heavy door and immediately discovered what everyone had been searching for. Kenneka Jenkins was lying face down on her side, one shoe missing from her foot. Her body was frozen solid from hours of exposure to the frigid temperature. Medical personnel arrived within minutes. At 12:48 a.m., a doctor from Resurrection Hospital officially pronounced Kenneka dead at the scene. Initial examination revealed a small cut on her foot, but no other visible signs of trauma. There were no obvious wounds, no evidence of a struggle, no indication that she had been physically harmed before entering the freezer. But the discovery immediately raised a critical question that would fuel months of speculation and investigation. The kitchen where Kenneka was found was supposed to be a secured area. Access required a key card that only authorized hotel personnel possessed. The space was not open to guests, and there were no signs that the security system had been breached or tampered with. How had a disoriented teenager managed to bypass hotel security measures and enter a restricted area? The friends who had left her at the party insisted they had no knowledge of how to access basement areas. Hotel staff claimed they had properly secured the space. Security footage showed Kenneka wandering alone through public corridors, but the cameras didn't capture her method of entry into the kitchen. This impossible detail, a civilian gaining access to a keycard-protected area, would become the foundation for conspiracy theories that persist to this day. Drop your theory in the comments. How did she get past hotel security into a locked kitchen? 3 weeks after Kenneka Jenkins' body was discovered, the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office released findings that would completely reshape the investigation. The autopsy report contained revelations that no one, not her family, not her friends, not the investigators, had anticipated. Kenneka's blood alcohol level measured 0.112, significantly above Illinois' legal driving limit of 0.08. This finding supported witness accounts of her severe disorientation at the party, but it contradicted her friends' claims that she had consumed only a single drink. The alcohol level alone, however, was not unusual for a 19-year-old at a hotel party. The bombshell came with the second toxicology finding. Medical examiners detected topiramate in Kenneka's system, a prescription medication used to treat epilepsy and prevent migraines. When investigators questioned her family about this discovery, they learned something crucial. Kaneka had never been prescribed topiramate. She had no history of epilepsy or migraines that would require this medication. Dr. Pani Arunkumar, the chief medical examiner, explained the significance of this combination to investigators. Alcohol and topiramate are synergistic, she stated. When taken together, their effects are dramatically amplified. The combination causes severe disorientation, memory loss, impaired concentration, poor coordination, confusion, and critically impaired judgment. This medical explanation suddenly made sense of everything witnesses had observed that night. Kaneka's inability to maintain balance, her confusion, her disconnection from conversations, and her apparent sadness were not the typical effects of alcohol consumption. She was experiencing a dangerous drug interaction that had left her profoundly compromised. The medical examiner then delivered 6 words that would change the entire trajectory of the case. This combination can be deadly. The investigation was no longer about finding who had harmed Kaneka Jenkins. It was about understanding how a teenager who had never taken epilepsy medication ended up with a potentially fatal drug combination in her system, and how that combination had led her to wander into a freezer from which she could not escape. Dr. Pani Arunkumar's autopsy findings provided the first clear explanation for Kaneka Jenkins' death. The official cause was hypothermia. Her body temperature had dropped fatally low during the hours she spent trapped in the walk-in freezer. But the toxicology results revealed why she had been unable to save herself. The combination of alcohol and topiramate had created what medical experts call a synergistic effect. Each substance amplified the other's impact on her central nervous system. At the levels found in her blood, Kaneka would have experienced severe cognitive impairment, loss of motor control, and critically compromised decision-making abilities. Dr. Arunkumar explained that topiramate affects the same brain receptors as alcohol, intensifying intoxication far beyond what either substance would cause alone. The medication can cause confusion, dizziness, and memory problems even when taken properly by prescribed patients. Combined with alcohol, these effects become dangerous. The autopsy revealed no signs of physical trauma, sexual assault, or struggle. Kaneka had not been beaten, attacked, or forcibly placed in the freezer. The small cut on her foot appeared consistent with stumbling or losing her shoe during her disoriented wandering through the hotel. Medical evidence showed that hypothermia had been the direct cause of death, with the drug combination serving as a substantial contributing factor. The freezer's temperature, combined with her impaired state, had created conditions that prevented her from recognizing the danger or taking action to save herself. When Rosemont police finally reviewed the hotel's surveillance system, they discovered hours of footage showing Kaneka's final movements. The videos revealed a young woman clearly struggling with severe impairment, stumbling through corridors, bumping into walls and handrails, moving without apparent purpose or destination. The timestamp on the final footage showing Kaneka alive read 3:32 a.m. Security cameras captured her entering the unused kitchen area, moving unsteadily toward the back of the space where the walk-in freezer was located. But the camera's angle created a crucial blind spot. The actual freezer entrance remained outside the field of view. This gap in visual evidence immediately became controversial. Andrew Holmes, a community activist who worked with the family during the early investigation, claimed he had reviewed the complete footage with police permission. Holmes stated publicly that the videos showed Kaneka walking into the freezer alone, with no indication that anyone had forced or followed her. However, the family's legal team disputed this account. Their attorneys argued they had only been shown selected clips or snippets of the surveillance footage, not the complete timeline that Holmes claimed to have seen. This discrepancy between official accounts and family access to evidence fueled public suspicion that critical footage was being withheld. The missing visual confirmation of how Kaneka entered the freezer became a focal point for conspiracy theories. Without definitive footage showing her final moments, questions persisted about whether she had truly been alone, whether the door had been properly functioning, and whether someone else might have been involved in her death. The wrongful death lawsuit filed by Teresa Martin revealed multiple levels of institutional negligence that had contributed to the tragedy. Hotel security had received several complaints throughout the night about the overcrowded, illegal party in room 926, yet no action was taken to shut down the gathering or monitor the situation more closely. Multiple hotel employees had witnessed Kanika wandering through corridors in a visibly disoriented state during the early morning hours. Security footage showed her stumbling, losing her balance, and clearly struggling with impairment. Yet none of these staff members approached her to offer assistance or assess whether she needed medical attention. The most critical failure involved the kitchen area where Kanika died. The space was supposed to be secured, accessible only to authorized personnel with proper keycards. However, the lawsuit revealed that the hotel had failed to properly restrict access to this area. The walk-in freezer remained operational, despite the kitchen being out of service. Court documents showed that the freezer's internal release mechanism was functional, meaning someone trapped inside should have been able to open the door from within. However, the warning instructions posted outside the freezer had faded over time, becoming difficult to read. More importantly, someone in Kanika's severely impaired condition would have been unable to understand or operate the safety mechanism. The hotel's security protocols, staff training, and facility management had all failed at crucial moments, creating conditions that allowed a preventable tragedy to occur. At 3:20 a.m., security cameras captured Kanika Jenkins stumbling near the hotel's front desk area. The footage shows a young woman in severe distress, barely able to maintain her balance as she moves through the lobby. Her coordination had deteriorated dramatically since her arrival at the party just 2 hours earlier. The drug combination coursing through her system had transformed a vibrant teenager into someone who could barely function. Topiramate and alcohol had created a perfect storm of impairment that affected every aspect of her cognitive and physical abilities. She was no longer capable of making rational decisions about her safety or even recognizing the danger she was placing herself in. Kanika should have been able to find the hotel's exit. The lobby area had clear sight lines to the main entrance, with illuminated signs directing guests toward the parking area where her mother's car waited. But the chemical interaction in her brain had destroyed her ability to process visual information or navigate familiar spaces. What should have been a simple walk to the door became an impossible maze. Instead of heading towards safety, Kanika wandered deeper into the hotel. Security footage tracked her movements as she made her way towards stairwells and service areas that guests were never meant to access. Her impaired judgment led her away from help and toward the basement level, where the unused kitchen space lay in darkness. The kitchen area that claimed Kanika's life contained a cruel irony that would haunt investigators and her family. The walk-in freezer was equipped with a properly functioning internal release mechanism. Anyone trapped inside should have been able to push a simple handle and open the door from within. The safety feature had been designed to prevent exactly the kind of tragedy that was about to unfold. But Kanika Jenkins was no longer capable of operating safety mechanisms or understanding warning signs. The topiramate and alcohol had reduced her cognitive function to such a degree that even basic survival instincts were compromised. When she entered that freezer, whether seeking shelter, following a confused impulse, or simply losing her way in the darkness, she sealed her own fate. The temperature inside the freezer hovered near 0 degrees Fahrenheit. As Kanika's body temperature began to drop, the hypothermia process accelerated the very cognitive impairment that was already destroying her ability to think clearly. Her body's natural responses to cold, shivering, seeking warmth, attempting escape, were all compromised by the drugs in her system. Hours passed in the freezer as Kanika's core temperature continued dropping. Her family was searching the hotel floors above, calling her name through corridors where she could no longer hear them. Her friends had already returned to Chicago, believing she would eventually surface. Hotel staff continued their normal routines, unaware that a teenager was dying in their basement. By dawn, hypothermia had completed its deadly work. The same substances that had prevented Kaneka from finding the hotel exit had also prevented her from saving herself once trapped. She had become a victim of chemistry, circumstance, and institutional failure. If you're still watching, you're one of us. Smash that like and share this case. The Rosemont Public Safety Department never filed criminal charges in connection with Kaneka Jenkins' death. Despite intense public pressure and viral social media campaigns demanding arrests, investigators concluded that no crime had been committed. The toxicology evidence, surveillance footage, and autopsy findings all pointed to a tragic accident rather than foul play. But the absence of criminal charges did not mean the absence of accountability. In December 2023, more than 6 years after Kaneka's death, her family reached a $10 million settlement with the Crowne Plaza Hotel, its security company, and the restaurant operator that managed the kitchen space. The settlement allocation included over $3.7 million to Teresa Martin, with additional amounts distributed to other family members. The civil lawsuit succeeded where criminal prosecution had failed because it operated under a different standard of proof. While criminal charges require evidence of intentional wrongdoing beyond reasonable doubt, civil negligence claims focus on failures to meet reasonable standards of care. The hotel's inability to secure restricted areas, monitor guests in distress, and respond promptly to missing person reports constituted legal negligence, even without criminal intent. The difference between criminal and civil law meant no one went to prison, but the hotel paid the price for institutional failures that contributed to a preventable death. The settlement represents acknowledgement that while Kaneka's death was accidental, it was not inevitable. The case raises troubling questions about hotel security nationwide. How many other guests wander into areas they shouldn't access? How many potentially dangerous situations go unnoticed by staff who are trained to observe but not intervene? How many other tragedies could be prevented by simple security measures, better staff training, or more prompt emergency responses? Kaneka Jenkins was 19 years old when she died, with college plans and a future that will never be realized. Her death serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the most devastating losses result not from malicious intent, but from a cascade of small failures and missed opportunities. The Crowne Plaza continues operating today with enhanced security protocols. Room 926 still hosts guests who likely never learn about the tragedy that occurred floors below them. Subscribe to TCI Crime Stories for the next case, and tell us what you'd investigate next. Some mysteries aren't about who did it, they're about who failed to prevent it.